They had warned her the mountains were nothing but a burial ground. They swore the Apache were demons creatures who left only bones frozen into the drifts. But as Briar Hale looked down at her children's small mouths, blue breaths, thin inside an Arizona whiteout, she understood something bitter and final. The so-called civilized world had shown her far less mercy than the wild ever could. That night she expected death. Her fingers closed around a revolver stiff with ice, her eyes fixed on the dark, waiting for it to swallow them whole. But when a shape stepped out of the storm, it did not carry violence. It carried warmth. A blanket. This is the story of how a woman, hunted by the law, found refuge where she had been taught to fear. How a widow, running with freezing children in her arms, crossed into fate. The wind did not merely blow. It shrieked. It sliced through the thin wool of Briar Hale's coat, biting her skin like shards of glass. It was the winter of 1881, a season old settlers would remember not for cattle drives or silver strikes, but for the snow that fell as if the land itself were trying to bury its sins. Briar staggered forward, boots vanishing into deep drifts. Each breath scorched her lungs. Strapped to her back in a torn quilt was 5-year-old Maeve, limp and burning with cold. Clutching her hand was 8-year-old Ira, his fingers white shaking. "Ma," he whispered, the wind nearly stealing his voice. "I can't feel my feet." Briar dropped to one knee, shielding him with her body. She studied his face, pale, waxen wrong. Fear punched through her chest. She gripped his shoulders, forcing strength into her voice. "You keep moving for us," she said. "You hear me? We don't stop. If we stop, we sleep." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Ira had seen the frozen cattle miles back, livestock turned into white statues by the storm. Briar glanced behind them. Snow erased their trail most as fast as they made it, but she knew tracks didn't matter. Rusk Calder would not stop. The name alone made the scar on her shoulder throb the bullet graze from 3 nights earlier. Calder wasn't just a marshal. He was a hunter wearing a badge, a man who ruled the dusty town of Bisbee like a personal kingdom. He hadn't only wanted her land. He wanted the water beneath it, the hidden veins that meant life in the desert. Thorn Hale, her husband, had known that. Thorn had been stubborn, honest. He had stood on the porch with his Winchester deed in hand, telling Calder to leave. Briar shut her eyes, but the memory forced its way through the rifle crack. Thorn's stunned expression, red blooming across his chest, the stink of powder, the laughter of the Calder riders. She had run into the night, dragging the children from their beds as flames climbed the walls behind them. Calder had thrown the torch himself. Then he framed her for the killing. By dawn, the posters were already nailed up across Bisbee. Briar Hale wanted for murder. Dead or alive, Ma Maeve murmured weakly from her back. "I'm here, sweetheart," Briar whispered, forcing her legs to move though they felt carved from stone. They were deep in the Dragoon Mountains now, rough country spoken of in whispers. Folks in Bisbee told stories of war parties and vanished travelers, of spirits and shadows that struck fast and disappeared faster. They said anyone caught here was already dead. But Briar had chosen. Behind her waited a rope and a corrupt lawman who would toss her children into an orphanage he controlled. Ahead lay the unknown. She chose the unknown. The sun dipped low, painting the snow purple and blue. Cold tightened its grip. Briar spotted a narrow cave, barely a crack in the granite, high up a steep slope. There, she said, pointing. "Come on, Ira. Just a little more." They clawed their way up slick stone. Briar's nails split as she hauled Maeve's weight with shaking arms. When they finally collapsed onto the cave's dry floor, Briar had nothing left. She unwrapped the children. Their bodies shook violently, the kind of shaking that comes before silence. Briar scraped together dry brush from the entrance thin twigs that wouldn't last long and struck her final match. The flame caught small, fragile. She pulled the children close as the fire flickered against the dark. The weak flame finally caught. It trembled against the surrounding darkness, pitiful but alive. Briar Hale pulled the children close, drawing them into her lap and wrapping her coat tight around all three bodies. Her hand drifted to the Colt Navy tucked at her waist. 2 rounds left. Only 2. 3 lives. She stared at the revolver as a thought slithered into her mind, cold and unwanted. If the frost claimed them, it would be slow. If Rusk Calder reached them first, it would be far worse. She pressed her lips to Ira's hair. "Tell me a story, Ma," he whispered, teeth rattling. Once Briar began, her voice unsteady. There was a land where the sun never failed, and a brave knight named Sir Ira guarded the night. She kept speaking until the words thinned and finally vanished. The fire shrank to dull embers. Cold crept back, stiffening fingers and legs. Briar's eyelids sagged. She knew the truth. This was how it ended. She tightened her arms around the children, praying the dark would be gentle. Then she heard it. Snow crunching. Not wind. Measured. Intentional. Boots. Then softer. Moccasins. Briar's eyes flew open. Fear flooded her veins. She snatched the revolver hands, shaking so violently, she struggled to draw back the hammer. She aimed at the cave mouth, where moonlight cut a pale square into the black. A shadow crossed it. A man stood there, tall, wide across the shoulders. He wore buckskin that blended with stone, a buffalo hide draped over his back. Long black hair fell down his spine, bound with a red cloth. A Winchester rested in his hands, barrel angled toward the ground. Apache. Briar's breath caught. "Stay back," she rasped. "I'll shoot." He didn't flinch, didn't rush. He studied her, then the gun, then the children shaking behind her. He stepped closer. "I said stop," Briar screamed, finger tightening. The man halted. Slowly he lifted one hand, palm open. Not surrender. Control. He spoke deep words, rolling in a language she didn't know. Then he switched to English, rough but steady. "The fire is dying." Briar blinked. "What fire?" he said, pointing at the embers. "Gone soon. Children too. If you come closer, I'll pull the trigger." Briar warned her, strength draining fast. The man tilted his head. "You shoot me, you still die. Cold kills you. Wolves kill you." He glanced toward the valley, or the men with star badges. Her blood iced. He knew. "How?" she whispered. "We watch," he said simply. "Smoke. Tracks." He slid the rifle over his shoulder, slow and deliberate. From a pouch he drew dried meat and a bundle of sage. "My name is Nayel," he said. "The wind told me where you were. It said you carry grief." He stepped past the gun as if it meant nothing. Briar was too weak to fire. Nayel knelt, feeding sage and wood into the dying coals. He breathed softly over them. Flames surged back to life, warmth flooding the cave, the air thick with the clean scent of burning sage. He looked up at her. Firelight danced in his dark eyes. He didn't resemble the monster whispered about in Bisbee. He looked like a man who understood children, like a father. "Put the iron down." "Woman of ash," Nayel said. "This is not where your story ends." Briar Hale did not lower the gun at once. Trust had dried up for her back in Bisbee, the day Judge Miller, a man who once shared her Sunday table, signed her arrest warrant without meeting her eyes. Why, she asked, her voice thin, though her arm trembled. "Why help us folks say your people kill settlers on sight?" Nayel sat cross-legged beside the fire, tearing dried venison into narrow strips. He offered one to Ira. The boy hesitated, glancing at his mother. Briar gave the smallest nod. Ira grabbed the meat and devoured it. "People say many things," Nayel said quietly. "They call us savages. Yet it was your people who burned the valley trees last moon. Your people who chased a mother and her children through a storm." He met Briar's gaze. "The Apache do not kill for pleasure. We kill to live. And we do not kill children." He tossed another strip to Briar. She caught it, hunger clawing her stomach. "Who hunts you?" Nael asked. "A lawman," Briar replied, chewing slowly. "Rusk Calder." Nael's face hardened. The name carried weight. He spat into the fire. "The snake," he muttered. "No honor. Shoots men in the back. Sells our women south to miners." "He killed my husband," Briar said. The words tore free at last. "Thornhale. He wants our land." Nael scoffed. "Land," he said. "Always land. Men trade their souls for dirt." He rose. The buffalo robe shifted, revealing a knife at his hip bone, and steel worn smooth by use. "The storm is breaking," he said, "but the cold will bite harder before dawn. You cannot stay." "I can't move them," Briar argued, nodding toward Maeve, finally asleep in shallow, shuddering breaths. "They're spent. If you remain, the snake finds you," Nael said. "His tracker is Ashen Fox. He is skilled. He will see the smoke." Nael kicked dirt over the fire, smothering it in an instant. "Hey," Briar cried. "We leave," Nael said. "Where?" "To the stronghold," he answered. "Where horses cannot climb. Where the snake cannot crawl." Briar hesitated. Following him meant vanishing from the known world. Crossing into the Apache stronghold, a place no white woman was said to enter and return, so the stories claimed. Then she thought of the Calder riders, of the rope. She holstered the pistol and lifted Maeve. Nael did not reach for the child he knew. Briar would not allow it yet. Instead, he took the heavy pack from her shoulders and slung it across his own. "Step where I step," he said. "Exactly." They moved into the night. The snowfall had ended, leaving the land washed in blue moonlight. Nael traveled without sound, gliding across the crusted snow. Briar struggled to follow, planting her boots into his tracks. Hours passed. Pines gave way to jagged stone cliffs, rising like the broken teeth of angry gods. This was the stronghold, a fortress of granite domes and sheer walls. As dawn bled gray into the sky, Briar's legs failed. She fell clutching Maeve, vision spinning. "I can't," she gasped. Nael turned. He studied her. Then he looked to the ridge and whistled sharply, the cry of a red-tailed hawk. Shadows peeled away from the rocks above. 3 figures emerged, silent, armed with bows and rifles. Briar's heart slammed against her ribs. She was surrounded. One figure, a younger man with painted streaks across his chest, leapt down from a boulder. His stare burned with hostility as he spoke rapidly to Nael, gesturing at Briar and the children. Briar didn't know the words, but she knew the meaning. "Why bring them? They are enemies. White eyes." Nael answered with calm authority. He pointed first to the children, then toward the north, back toward Bisbee. He spoke the name Calder aloud. The younger warrior's expression shifted. The hostility did not disappear, but it hardened into understanding. His gaze flicked to Briar Hale, lingering on the revolver at her hip. Nael turned back to her. "This is Sorek," he said, using a name Briar would later learn carried weight among them. "I had no other choice." Briar forced herself upright, pride dragging her to her feet. He says Nael continued, a rare hint of a smile crossing his face, that only a mother wolf would carry her cubs into a lion's den to save them from jackals. Sorek snapped a command. The other 2 warriors stepped forward. Before Briar could protest, they wrapped the children in thick, clean blankets and lifted them onto their shoulders. "Come," Nael said. "You are not a prisoner, Briar Hale, but you are not a guest. You are something else." They guided her through a narrow split in the rock, a hidden passage opening into a sheltered valley. It was green and calm, protected from the wind, a stream cutting clean through its heart. Wickiups dotted the valley floor. Smoke curled from cook fires. Children ran with hoops and sticks. Women ground corn on flat stone slabs. It was a village. It was a home. When Briar stumbled into the clearing, all movement stopped. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, dark, guarded, unblinking. The silence pressed down like judgment. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face lined deep with years. She wore buckskin stitched with beads, gray hair braided with strips of red cloth. She stopped inches from Briar's face, carrying the scent of earth and smoke. Her gaze dropped to Briar's cracked, bleeding hands, then to the children, then back to Briar's eyes. She reached out and touched Briar's cheek. Her skin was rough like weathered stone. "She carries winter in her bones," the woman said, turning to Niall. Niall nodded. "She runs from darkness, grandmother," the old woman. Yana looked back at Briar. She did not smile, but something in her eyes softened. She closed Briar's fingers around a smooth, warm stone. "The white man builds walls to keep people out." Yana said, her English clear and deliberate. "We build fires to bring them in." She gestured toward a wickiup near the stream. "This is your place now." Her voice hardened. "But know this. We do not give charity. We give life for life. If you stay, you work. If you work, you live." Briar looked at the shelter. She looked at Ira and Maeve, already settled near a fire, watched by curious Apache children. Then she looked back toward the mountain pass, knowing Rusk Calder was still out there, hunting. She closed her hand around the stone. "I'll work," Briar whispered. But as she stepped toward the fire, she did not yet understand that the hardest labor would not be grinding corn or scraping hides. The hardest task would be becoming one of them. And the test ahead would be written in blood. Because Rusk Calder was not only hunting her, he was hunting them. And Briar Hale had led him straight to the stronghold's gate. The first week was not mercy. It was a trial by fire. Every soft illusion Briar had once held, shaped by dime novels back in St. Louis, burned away with the sunrise. There was no rest here. To live Apache was to move always. Yana did not speak to Briar again after that first night. She only pointed. To the jars that needed water from the stream uphill. To the mesquite beans that needed grinding. Briar's hands, once softened by domestic life in Bisbee, split and blistered. A shard of obsidian bit into her palms as she scraped fat from a deer hide. "You scrape like a wounded bird," a voice said. Briar looked up, sweat stinging her eyes. The speaker was a young woman, no more than 20, sharp-featured eyes stripped of mercy. Her name was Kiva. Her husband had died a year earlier at the hands of Mexican cavalry. She wore grief like armor. "Then show me." Briar Hale snapped, patience splintering. "Don't just sneer at me." Kiva stared, caught off guard by the sudden edge in Briar's voice. Without another word, Kiva dropped to one knee, snatched the scraper from Briar's hands, and worked the hide with long, smooth, powerful strokes. "The hide isn't your enemy," she said flatly. "The fat is. Fight the hide and you destroy it. Work with it, and it softens like life." Briar took the tool back and copied the motion. Pain flared through her arms, but the blade moved cleaner. Better. While Briar labored until her back burned, the children were changing in their own ways. In the stronghold, children were not coddled. They were free. That freedom came with rules. Ira, once terrified, was absorbed into a pack of boys his age. They spoke no English. He spoke no Apache. But the language of boys running, grappling, throwing stones needed no translation. Briar watched throat tight as a fierce warrior named Rye showed Ira how to hold a small bow. They laughed when he missed. Hard laughter meant to temper him. When Ira struck the target the next day, they cheered. Maeve followed the camp dogs everywhere, huge wolfish animals she stroked without fear. By the second week, she sat among the women, clumsy fingers weaving baskets. She forgot the cold. She forgot hunger. Briar did not. Every night she cleaned her revolver. Every night she searched the ridgelines. One evening, Niall joined her fire. He carried a skinned rabbit ready for the coals, an offering or payment. He studied her hands. "They are ruined," he said. "They work," Briar replied, skewering the meat. "Like you said, life for life." Niall sat. "Sorek watches you," he he said. He says you walk loud. You break twigs. I'm trying. Trying will get you killed, Niall said simply. Tomorrow you stop scraping hides. Tomorrow you learn how to move. The lessons were brutal. Niall led her into the high rocks and made her cross beds of dry pine needles without sound. Each crunch earned a pebble to the shoulder. Too loud, he said. The snake hears you. I am not Apache. Briar shouted after the 50th stone struck her. I'm a dressmaker's daughter. The dressmaker's daughter froze in the snow. Niall said, voice sharp. What stands here is something else or nothing. Choose. Briar glared, then forced herself to breathe. She lowered her eyes to the ground. She stopped fighting the land and began reading it. She watched where Niall stepped along stone edges, not loose gravel on the balls of his feet, never the heel. She stepped. No sound. No pebble. Better, Niall grunted. Now we track. For 3 weeks this was her life pain labor learning. Slowly fear gave way to respect. She saw how they honored the old, how laughter rolled deep and free around night fires, how truth mattered above all else and lies were treated like illness. She began to feel safe. That was her mistake. One afternoon, as Briar rinsed wool in the icy stream, she caught a reflection in the water. Not Apache. A man in a dust-colored duster face hidden beneath a brimmed hat. She spun water, splashing, hand flying to the knife at her belt. Nothing. Only wind in the willows. She steadied herself. Fear, she told herself. Memory. Nothing more. But when she returned to her wickiup, her blood turned cold. On her sleeping mat, where her head rested, lay a single spent brass casing. 45 calibers, a peacemaker round, the kind Rusk Calder carried. Apache used Winchesters. Old stock. Not this. This shell was new. Bright. It wasn't imagination. He had been here. Inside the stronghold. He hadn't killed her. He had marked her. Briar ran for Niall's shelter. The brass casing was crushed in Briar Hale's fist, so tightly it bit into her skin. She stormed inside without warning, ignoring every custom she had learned. Niall was seated drawing a whetstone along the edge of a lance. He looked up, startled by the violence of her entrance. He was here, Briar hissed, thrusting the casing toward him. Rusk Calder. He was inside the camp. Niall accepted the casing, rolling it slowly between his fingers. His face stayed calm, too calm. He was not inside the camp, Niall said evenly. If he had been, the dogs would have opened his throat. Then how did this end up on my bed? Briar shot back. He's mocking me. He knows exactly where I am. We have to leave. She paced, breath sharp. I have to take the children and go before he brings soldiers down on all of you. Niall rose slowly. He studied the casing, then her face. Sit. I won't sit. We're in danger. Sit. The command cracked through the shelter like thunder. Briar dropped onto a stool, stunned into stillness. Niall exhaled, his shoulders heavy. The casing is not from the snake. Briar stared. What? It is mine. The words knocked the air from her chest. Yours, she whispered. Why? To see if you were ready, Niall said. He could not meet her eyes. He turned toward the opening, and because the time has come for truth. Cold settled in her stomach. What truth? Sorek did not let you stay out of mercy, Niall said quietly. And I did not save you, only because the wind spoke. He faced her again. We have hunted Calder for 2 years. He murdered my brother in a jail cell in Tombstone. He sells our trails to bluecoats, yet he is a coward. He hides in towns. He never climbs into the mountains. Understanding struck Briar like a blow. No, she breathed. We needed bait, Niall said. When I found you in the snow, when I learned who hunted you, I knew. His pride would not let a woman escape him. He would follow you into the dragon's mouth. Briar stood, legs shaking. Betrayal burned through her chest. I trusted you, she said. My children trusted you. To you, we were just meat on a hook. You are people to me now, Niall said, urgently stepping closer. Briar, listen. The slap cracked loud in the shelter. Briar's hand struck his face with the strength she had earned scraping hides and hauling stone. Niall did not move. He took the blow, his cheek flushing red. My husband died for pride. Briar spat, tears blurring her vision. Now you risk my children for revenge. You are no better than him. I fight so my people live, Niall shot back, voice rising. Calder brings death to us every season. One trap ends it. I would choose that trade 1,000 times. And if the trap fails, Briar asked coldly. If he brings an army, he will not, Niall said with certainty. He wants your water rights. If soldiers come, the land goes to the government. He will bring riders. Guns for hire. Men we can kill. Your arrogance will bury us all, Briar whispered. A sharp cry pierced the air, a high trilling warning from the perimeter. Niall snatched up his Winchester. It begins. He rushed outside. Briar followed, hand closing around her revolver. They ran to the valley's edge, where warriors gathered behind stone. Sorek knelt there, peering through a brass spyglass. He lowered it, grim satisfaction on his face. He comes, Sorek said in Apache. Then his eyes cut to Briar. The snake is hungry. Briar took the spyglass. She looked down the canyon, the single path into the stronghold. Men rode upward through the pass. Not soldiers, no blue coats. A posse of nearly 20 dusters, flapping wide hats, low rifles, resting easy across saddles. The Calder riders had arrived. At the head of the column, astride a towering black stallion, rode Rusk Calder. Even from this distance, Briar Hale recognized the brutal line of his jaw. But Niall had been wrong. Calder hadn't come with guns alone. Trailing behind the riders struggling up the rocky grade was a mule team, hauling machinery, compact iron-framed, mounted on 2 heavy wheels. Briar's blood turned to ice. She had seen one once in a parade back in St. Louis. Niall, she screamed, that's not a wagon. Niall squinted through the glare. What is it? It's a Hotchkiss gun, Briar shouted. A mountain cannon. It fires explosive shells. The color drained from Niall's face. The Apache knew rifles. They knew ambush. They did not know artillery. He didn't come to arrest me, Briar whispered, understanding crashing down on her. The plan had been simple. Let the Calder riders funnel into the narrow throat of the pass, then rain arrows and bullets from above. A classic ambush. The cannon shattered everything. Get the women and children to the caves, Niall roared. Back, fall back. Below. Calder lifted one hand. The column halted. They were still 300 yards out beyond arrow reach, just outside Winchester range. Calder knew exactly where he stood. He barked an order. The men dismounted. The cannon was unlimbered. Ira Mave Briar turned and ran. The village erupted into chaos. Mothers seized infants. Elders stamped out fires. Warriors shouted warnings. Briar spotted Ira standing frozen, clutching his small bow. Where's your sister? She yelled. With the dogs, he stammered. By the stream. Briar shoved Ira toward Yana. Take him to the caves. Don't let go, Briar Yana began. Go, Briar screamed. She spun and sprinted for the stream. The first blast thundered through the canyon. It sounded like the mountain breaking apart. Whistle thump, boom! The shell struck near the drying racks. Earth, stone, and iron tore through the air. A wickiup vanished. A horse screamed. Maeve Briar shouted. She ducked through falling debris and spotted her daughter huddled beneath a fallen log. Hands clamped over her ears. Briar slid through the mud and threw herself over the child just as another shell detonated along the bank, water and grit raining down. She hauled Maeve upright. Run, she cried. Run to the big rocks. She shoved the girl toward the caves, then froze. The truth unfolded in front of her. The shelling wasn't meant to kill alone. It was cover. While explosions pinned the Apache down, Calder's men climbed the rock faces, spreading wide. They were flanking the ridge. Nail and Sorek fired desperately from above, but the riders carried Sharp's rifles, buffalo guns, 50 caliber beasts that killed from impossible distances. Apache warriors fell the moment they raised their heads. Briar's eyes snapped toward the ridge. A rider climbed a narrow spur above Niall's position. He was lining up a shot straight into Niall's back. Briar didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She drew the Colt Navy, braced her arm against a tree just as Niall had taught her. Breathe. Squeeze. She fired. The recoil slammed her shoulder. Up on the ridge, the rider jerked, then toppled backward, vanishing down the cliff. Niall spun. He saw the fallen man. Then he looked down and saw smoke curling from Briar's pistol. He nodded once. Then the Hotchkiss roared again. This shell struck the ridge head-on. Stone exploded outward. Niall vanished into the blast. No Briar screamed. The firing from above fell silent. The line was broken. Calder's voice rolled through the canyon, carried by stone and arrogance. "Briar Hale," he shouted. "I know you're in there. Send out the girl and the boy, and I'll make it quick for the rest of these savages. You have 1 minute." Briar Hale stood amid the burning wreckage of what had become her home. Smoke drifted low across the valley. Dust settled along the shattered ridge. Niall was gone. Sorek was dragging wounded warriors back toward cover. The line had collapsed. They were being overrun. Briar looked down at the revolver clenched in her hand. 1 round left. She glanced toward the caves where her children were hidden. Then toward the advancing Calder riders. That was when she saw it. Through the smoke near the place where Niall had vanished, a hand clawed upward from the rubble. Then an arm. Niall hauled himself free, blood pouring from a gash along his forehead. Alive, weaponless. His rifle lay shattered beside him. Their eyes met. Niall pointed north toward a narrow goat trail that climbed the steepest face of the mountain. "Run." Briar shook her head. If she fled, they would be hunted down. The water would be lost. Everything would be lost. The ground bucked beneath her feet, nearly throwing her from the ledge she was climbing. Calder's men shouted below. "Pour it on," Rusk Calder bellowed. Their breaking Briar crested the spur. She now stood directly above the cannon crew, no more than 40 feet overhead. The satchel of black powder slammed against her hip. The sharp stink of sulfur rose from the gun below. She looked down. 3 men worked the Hotchkiss. Behind them, Calder sat his horse, calmly reloading his revolver, laughing as if at a show. "Flush them out," Calder shouted. "I want the woman alive, the rest can rot." Briar struck the torch. Resin-soaked wood flared bright and violent. She didn't simply drop the satchel. That would leave too much to chance. Her gaze climbed to the rock shelf above the gunners, a massive slab of shale held in place by a rotten, ancient web of roots. She jammed the powder satchel into a fissure at the base of the shelf. She shoved the torch in beside it. "Hey!" Briar screamed. The cry ripped through the canyon. Gunfire faltered. Heads snapped upward. Calder squinted into the sun. He saw her silhouette against the sky, hair wild stance, unbroken a woman, carved from fire and ash. "Briar." He called his voice a blend of surprise and sick delight. "Come down, darling. Get off my land," Briar whispered. She dove away from the ledge. The explosion wasn't a rifle crack. It was a deep rolling whoomp. The shale shelf disintegrated. Stone that had clung to the canyon wall for centuries tore free. The landslide slammed downward with the force of a giant's hammer. The cannon crew screamed. The Hotchkiss vanished beneath rock. The mule team was crushed instantly. Dust and debris exploded through the narrow pass. Calder's stallion reared, hurling him hard into the dirt. The debris missed him by inches, but the shockwave left him stunned and gasping. Silence fell. The cannon was gone. On the ridge, Niall wiped blood from his eyes. He saw the shattered mountain. He saw the woman of ash bring it down. Niall lifted his broken rifle and roared a war cry that froze the blood. Sorek now. The counterattack was savage. Freed from the cannon's grip, Apache warriors surged from the rocks like floodwater. Haska led the charge, knife flashing. In the pass below, it became slaughter. Blinded by dust and terror, the Calder riders fired wildly as Apache closed in. Steel met flesh. It was hand to hand. Briar slid down the far side of the spur scree, tearing her palms raw. She hit the canyon floor and pushed into the choking haze. She had one bullet. She had one target. She moved through the chaos, ignoring the fighting shapes around her. She was hunting. She found him near the canyon wall, struggling to calm his horse. Calder was battered, duster gray, with dust hat gone, face streaked with blood. He reached for the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. Rusk Calder spun. He froze. Briar Hale stood 10 feet away, the Colt Navy leveled at his chest. Her arms were steady as stone. Calder blinked, eyes flicking across the chaos. His riders, falling as cannon, buried, then back to her. A sneer twisted his mouth. Well now, he spat. The dressmaker grew claws. Drop the rifle, Briar said. Calder laughed, a dry rasping sound. You won't shoot. You're a God-fearing woman. You don't have the stomach to kill a man cold. I'm not a woman anymore, Briar said, her voice flat. I'm a mother. If you kill me, Calder warned, his hand edging toward the holster, the territory will hunt you. You'll hang. So will your brats. The territory ends where these mountains begin, Briar replied. Calder moved. He was fast, one of the quickest draws in Bisbee. His hand blurred toward the peacemaker. Briar didn't draw. She was already aiming. Crack! The shot slammed through the canyon. Calder stiffened and stared down at his chest as red spread across his white shirt, blooming over his heart. He looked back at Briar, eyes wide with real surprise. He wheezed. He dropped to his knees, then pitched forward into the dust. Briar stood over him. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a crushing bone-deep relief. The monster was dead. She lowered the gun. Her legs folded and she sank into the dirt as the adrenaline drained away. A shadow crossed her. She looked up. Niall stood there, coated in dust and blood. That was not his own. His gaze moved from the dead marshal to the crushed cannon, then back to Briar. He did not offer his hand. He offered something else. Niall untied the knife from his belt, the bone-handled blade he had once threatened her with. He turned it in his palm and held it out, handle first. The ash is gone, Niall said quietly. Only the fire remains. The silence after the canyon's collapse weighed heavier than the thunder that came before it. For 3 days, smoke clung low to the Dragoon Mountains. A gray shroud snagged on jagged peaks. It smelled of sulfur-burned pine and the copper bite of blood, a scent Briar Hale knew would never leave her. She did not rest. The fury that carried her up the Devil's Staircase burned away, leaving a hollow, trembling exhaustion. Still, she could not sit. There was work. The Apache did not mourn as Bisbee did, with veils and parlor tears. They mourned with labor. They mourned with motion. Briar worked beside Yana and the women moving through the wreckage of the lower camp. They salvaged what remained: arrows, unbroken pots, lengths of leather. The bodies of the Calder riders were stripped of weapons and ammunition, then left deep in the canyon for coyotes and carrion birds. It was harsh. It was necessary. Briar did not flinch. The earth had to be fed, but the Apache dead were honored with a reverence that split her heart. She watched them wrap a young warrior, one she remembered helping Ira with his bow, in a red blanket. They laid him high in a rock crevice, facing the rising sun, sealing the stones so wolves could not disturb his rest. There were no hymns, only the slow beat of a drum and the shaman's low grieving chant. On the second evening, Briar sat by the fire outside her wickiup. Her hands were torn raw, her dress ripped and stained with dust. She cleaned the Colt Navy, the familiar ritual steadying her frayed nerves. "You polish the metal until it bleeds," a voice rasped. Briar looked up. Niall stood there leaning on a crude ashwood crutch. His leg was bound where shrapnel from the Hotchkiss had torn him. His forehead was stitched with horsehair, a jagged black seam against his bronze skin. Alive, still standing. "It's filthy," Briar Hale said, quietly, never pausing the steady motion of her hands. "Powder fouls the action. The gun is clean," Niall replied, easing himself down across from her with visible pain. "It's the memory that's stained." Briar stopped. She studied her hands. They no longer looked like the ones she remembered, no longer pale and soft. They were darkened by sun, cut and scarred strong. The hands of a woman who had killed a U.S. Marshal without hesitation. "I don't feel guilt," she said at last. The words felt strange on her tongue. "I should." "Scripture says thou shalt not kill," she swallowed. "But when I watched him fall, I didn't feel shame. I felt wind. I felt lighter." "The snake threatened the nest," Niall said simply. "The hawk feels no guilt when it drops the snake, only the safety of the branch." He reached into his pouch and drew out a small object. A doll, crudely carved from cottonwood hair, braided from corn silk. "Maeve lost hers in the shelling," he said, setting it in Briar's hands. "I made this. It is not beautiful, but it is hers." Briar closed her fingers around it. Her eyes burned not for Rusk Calder, not for bloodshed, but for this quiet kindness carved out of war. "Where are they?" she asked. "Ira is with the horses," Niall said, "learning to calm them after the thunder. Maeve is with Yana grinding mesquite." He watched her closely. "They are not afraid, Briar. They are home." Briar's gaze drifted to the corral. She saw Ira standing beside a massive paint horse, his small hand resting on its muzzle, whispering softly. The animal stood calm, obedient. He no longer looked like the frozen child she had carried up the mountain. He looked rooted. "And you," Niall asked, "where is your heart?" "My heart is tired," Briar answered. "The winter has passed." Niall said, his voice turning grave. "The passes are open. The bluecoats will not come. They fear the ghost who broke the mountain." He paused. "You could leave. Mexico lies south. There are towns where a woman with a needle can live quietly." It was an offer of freedom. He was opening the door. Briar stared into the fire. She imagined towns. The looks she would endure, the widow who lived among savages, the schools that would try to beat the wild out of Ira, the churches that would whisper damnation into Maeve's ears. She imagined the loneliness of crowded rooms. Then she looked at Niall, at the scars crossing his chest, the iron calm in his jaw, the eyes that had witnessed cruelty, yet still carved a doll for a white child. "Peace," Briar said slowly. "I never found peace in towns." She stood and holstered the revolver. "I found debts, judgments, laws written by men who never carried water." She met his gaze. "I think peace is a fire you build yourself." Niall studied her, something deep and solemn softening his expression. "Then you must be reborn." The ceremony took place 2 nights later, beneath a full moon that washed the stronghold in silver and shadow. The entire band gathered in the central circle. The air was not heavy with grief. It crackled with life. They had survived. They had won. And the woman standing at the center was no longer an outsider. Yana beckoned Briar forward. Briar wore a new dress of softened buckskin, bleached pale and fringed with small silver cones that chimed when she moved, a garment reserved for women of standing. Ira and Maeve sat in the front. Ira wore a red cloth band at his brow. Maeve had painted thin yellow lines along her cheeks. They watched their mother with shining pride. The drumming ceased. Silence filled the canyon, amplified by stone and moonlight. Yana lifted a clay bowl filled with sacred yellow pollen. She dipped her fingers and stepped before Briar. The old woman's eyes, so often sharp and testing, were warm. The wind carried you here, Yana said, her voice reaching every edge of the circle. The snow tested you. The enemy tried to break you, but you didn't shatter. Yana's voice rose like wind over stone. You are not glass. You are obsidian, sharp, black, strong. She pressed sacred pollen to Briar Hale's forehead, then across her shoulders and chest. The white world called you, Doris, Yana continued. But that woman died in the blizzard. The woman standing here, she called down thunder. She walks now with the mountain spirit. Yana turned to the gathered tribe. Who claims her? Niall stepped forward, leaving behind his crutch bearing weight on his wounded leg through nothing but will. I claim her, he said, voice firm. Not as servant, not as guest. I claim her as Sheik, is my sister, my blood. He looked at Briar, holding her gaze. And if she wills it, perhaps one day more. The air held still. The meaning hung heavy and sweet. A blush crept across Briar's cheeks, but she didn't look away. Does the tribe accept? Yana asked. A low, powerful sound answered her bows, striking quivers in rhythm. A sound of assent. Then take your name, Yana said to Briar. You are Goya, the wise woman. The one who acted when men stood still. Goya, Briar whispered. It felt right. Not like a mask, but like armor, like memory rewritten. The drums began again, faster now, beating the pulse of celebration. The women surged forward, pulling Goya into the dance. Maeve grabbed her hand, giggling, while Ira joined the boys circling the fire. As Goya moved, the flames turned the world into streaks of gold and shadow. And she understood. She hadn't just been running from Rusk Calder. She'd been running toward this, toward a life where worth wasn't weighed in banknotes or property lines, but in courage, loyalty, and who stood beside you when the shooting started. Later, after the embers faded and the songs quieted, Gaia walked alone to the canyon's edge. She stared north toward the invisible line where civilization began. She touched the dried pollen on her brow. She thought of the bounty posters curling and yellowing on the sheriff's wall in Bisbee, the whispers that would spread of a white witch, a ghost, bride, a traitor. Let them talk. Let them spin their stories in saloons and Sunday pews. She had her own story now. Mama Ira stood behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Are we staying? For real? Gaia knelt and pulled him close. She felt his warmth, real, solid, alive. Yes, Tobias, she said, using his old name once, just to let it go. We're staying. This is where the fire is. Good, Ira mumbled, resting his head on her shoulder. Niall said he'll teach me how to track a cougar tomorrow. I can't miss that. Briar laughed, clear, free, and light. No, you can't miss that. She rose and took his hand. Together they walked back toward the wickiup where Niall waited by the fire, feeding the flame that kept the cold at bay. The dressmaker from St. Louis was gone. Doris O'Malley was gone. Gaia walked home. And so the widow became the warrior. She discovered that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who bleeds beside you. In the end, she didn't just survive the Wild West. She became part of its soul. She gave up the safety of a cage for the danger of freedom. And in that freedom, she found the one thing she'd searched for her whole life, a place to belong, a home. If this story lit a fire in you, hit that like button. It fuels more tales like this. Share your thoughts below. Would you have chosen to stay in the stronghold? Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story from the frontier. Pass it on to someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest winter, hope survives. Until next time, keep your powder dry. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.